Uh,
Oh, all right.
Hi, this is Mark Arnold at Fun Ideas Podcast, and today we're going to talk Captain Marvel and all the various versions of them with Captain Zorikh. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Glad to be here finally.
Yay. So I have a book here. It's just one of the many books. I actually am a fan of this version of Captain Marvel. But I know there's the Marvel version. I know there's the one that goes split. I know there's a zillion other ones. How do you make heads or tails out of that? And how did you become a fan?
Well, this whole I've been writing this project called Captain Marvel Culture since shortly after 9/11. What happened was that was also the early days of the internet, as we may recall, and I was at a job that was down on 17 State Street, which, if you ever look at a picture of Lower Manhattan, is that curved glass building that looks like one quarter of a Sapporo can. All right. So as you can imagine, after a couple of airplanes fell into a couple of buildings, it was one. We were they, they had to evacuate the whole building, and it wasn't for 2 weeks till they let us come back in. And I got lucky in that I decided that that's the day I'm going to go to DMV and renew my learner's permit. And so I was and so I was sitting in my room reading a book about the Civil War when I heard what sounded like either a gunshot or a really loud truck backfire, and it wasn't for half an hour later that I looked out the window and saw the flames. Well, the smoke, as it were. So I wasn't there. I didn't have that trauma, but the trauma of having to get home. In that, some people took 7 hours to get home that day. But 2 weeks later, I got to work, and I was one of the first people called in, and they said, "Well, we're going to have to make some cutbacks, but I think you're really going to like the severance package." So there I was saying, what am I going to do with my life now? And I saw, oh, there are things happening in the internet. There's some folks someone starting a new online university. What do I know that I can teach? And well, and I came up a history of I put some ideas, and someone said, why don't you write a history of comic books? And I'm like, I could. And I started, that's too big, said I. So for an internet university. But why don't I just pick one thing about comic books that'll enable me to hit all the high points and low points and so forth. And there's been more than one Captain Marvel. And so, if I just follow the history of the many Captain Marvels, that might be a good way to start. And everybody's getting something wrong about it on the interwebs anyway. So, why don't I be the guy who gets it right?
Cool.
And so I wrote an introduction. I wrote a first chapter, and a month after the website opened, it closed.
Mm.
So, but then I thought, why don't I just do it myself? And so I started writing. I met a guy at a comic convention who happened to have a couple of bucks, and he sponsored the project, and I got really into it, and then I was getting into it, and then there was this girl, and we started going out, and then she inspired me to create uh, things. Basically, she became a model for a female action hero that she inspired me to create, and that led to um, going to certain kinds of parties, and that led to certain kinds of activities, and that led to training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and that led to managing a female wrestling team that both competed and did private sessions, and that led to that person discovering that there are a lot more things in the world than what you know when you grow up on the east end of Long Island. And I'm going to cut to the chase and say that it's all wrapped up in a story I now call My Ex-Girlfriend and His Wife. Turned it into a country song. And as you can imagine, and this turned into a business that was actually making a lot of money before I stopped being a part of that business. And I'm, not telling any names or leaving out any details to protect the guilty and innocent alike.
Hmm.
But as you can imagine, this opened a whole new chapter in my life where I was making movies and then going into the World Championship of Medieval Armored Combat and then meeting another girl and then but then realizing that gee, I missed a few months rent, so I better get a job. And so the project got delayed.
I bet.
Okay. And right now, I'm finishing up on a documentary of the World Championships of Medieval Armored Combat from 2018 in Scotland, and we don't have time to talk about why that got delayed. But once that's done, I'm going to get back on the horse and finish writing the book. But in the meantime, I started a YouTube channel, and on this YouTube channel, I show videos of the lectures that I give about the subject and reviews of recent things that have happened in Captain Marvel world.
Mhm.
I've got a blog spot where I've been actually, giving updates on the histories, and I actually did a chapter. I'm working on when I'm at work and I don't have much to do at work. I'm like, okay, let me do the next chapter in the history, just brief enough to make a blog entry. And so you can actually, I've gotten all the way up to about the Amalgam universe with the history of the Captain Marvels through that chapter by chapter. And whenever there's a comic convention or something, one of my go-to programming contributions is something involving the history of the Captain Marvels. Lately, it's been explaining the Captain Marvels who are in the movies.
Mm.
Because if I'm trying to explain all of them, that's going to take more than an hour. I did it in 27 minutes about 10 years ago. And if you look up the YouTube channel, History of Captain Marvel in 25 minutes or fewer, because fewer is the proper term, that's mine. And that's the only history that claims to be the history of all the Captain Marvels that doesn't get stuff wrong.
Mm.
So that's how I got into it, and that's why it's taken so long. But the what I've realized in the course of doing the studies is that the name of Captain Marvel is the most important name of a character in comic book history to look at regarding Western popular culture and history, because unlike your Superman, Batman, Wonder Man, Spider-Man, it's a Wonder Woman, etc., who all evolved over time, but were always the same character. And I'm not going to get into Ben Reilly and the Spider Clones. Face it, Spider-Man was always the same character. All right.
Yeah.
They were all like, related or clones, but it
Right.
was the same. Spider-Man was Spider-Man, right?
Right.
Superman was Superman, even if it was his son. Wonder Woman was Wonder Woman, even if it was her niece.
Right.
Batman was Batman, even if it was Robin, it was still Batman. Even if it was Robin or Azrael, it was still Batman.
Right. Right.
But every Captain Marvel was created from scratch to serve the market of their day. So
Mm.
just to figure out who was Captain Marvel when and why, you have to look at the history of everything. You got to go all the way. You got to start with time, but then you move on and you get to Earth and you get to humans and you get to humans creating art and you get to humans creating sequential art. And then and then technology, which leads to printing. And then printing and sequential art go together like butter on toast. And then the development of sequential art, and then how printing led to things like magazines and newspapers and magazines, and newspapers and comic strips, and then magazines reprinted the comic strips and into comic books, and then you got superheroes, and you
Right.
had to go there to get to hit the publishers of the magazines who created superheroes to get to the first Captain Marvel.
Mm.
All
Which the
right.
first Captain Marvel is the Fawcett version, correct?
Right,
I
right.
just want to make
This,
sure that
yeah, this
I
guy.
at least know
Okay.
that fact.
The guy who was occasionally confused with the Flash because Carmine Infantino was a big fan of Captain Marvel, and he says that the Silver Age Flash that he designed was basically a version of a character he created called Captain Wiz, based on Wiz comics, and the villains, the Rogues Gallery, were the colors of evil. But other folks who are contemporaries of his cast doubt upon the specific accuracy of that claim. Not that Carmine Infantino is Stan Lee with regards to his memory, but that he may be maybe making himself a bigger part of the history than he really is. But the point is that it can't be denied that the Silver Age Flash, the modern Flash,
Mhm.
is often confused for this.
Yep.
And so whenever I see someone wearing a Flash shirt, I say, "Hey, look, it's Captain Marvel," and they say, "No, it's the Flash," and I say, "Now you know how I feel." I mean, freaking Vice magazine's "What Not to Wear" column had a picture of a guy wearing this and said, "Well, they say the Flash is the fastest man alive, but you don't look like you're going anywhere quickly, buddy." It's like they could have just said, "Hey, Captain Marvel has the speed of Mercury, but you don't know, you're not going anywhere quickly, buddy." But no, so, and then I got to show you one other thing. This, all right,
And what is that? Oh,
that
that's Marvel Man, isn't it?
this is a leather Renaissance style doublet inspired by Marvel Comics' first Captain Marvel second costume.
Oh, okay.
But since it's a red leather vest with something with points on it as a logo, I get called Star-Lord at comic conventions. Fortunately, at most comic conventions, I can stick my arm out and hit a Star-Lord cosplayer. So I drag them over and I say, "Okay, everybody, listen up. This is Star-Lord. This is Marvel Comics' first Captain Marvel styled after a. This is Marvel Comics' first Captain Marvel second costume styled in a Renaissance doublet, and that is Star-Lord. And this is the original Captain Marvel." Then one day, and if I'm lucky, there's a guy with a Flash shirt, and I grab him over and say, "This is the Flash. This is the original Captain Marvel. This is Marvel Comics' first Captain Marvel second costume styled as Renaissance doublet, and that's Star-Lord." And then one day I'm at a convention and I see a guy in a Flash Gordon shirt. So I grab him and I grab a Flash. And then here comes a Star-Lord and I grab him. And so I'm like, this is Flash Gordon. This is the Flash. This is the original Captain Marvel. This is Marvel Comics' first Captain Marvel second costume styled Renaissance doublet. And this is Star-Lord. Get your cameras ready. We're going to do it in reverse. Say it with me. Star-Lord. And I wish I had my video rolling. It would totally be on YouTube right now. But you see the confusion. And somebody's got to set the record straight.
Wow. And
Yeah.
the irony of it is, with the original Fawcett one, there's all that litigation over the years with DC and Superman, and yet these other things are even closer than the original Captain Marvel or Superman ever were, as far as logos and costume designs and things like that. Kind of
Or
interesting.
how about story, character development, and plot points?
Yeah.
Marvel Comics' first Captain Marvel was an alien visitor from another planet disguised as a mild-mannered rocket scientist.
This one.
Yep,
Yeah.
that guy, right? and at this rocket, at the missile base, the rocket base that he was working at, which the background was drawn like it was a southwestern desert, even though they called it the Cape and later said it was Cape Canaveral. So obviously that the fact that that it would be Cape Canaveral was Roy Thomas's idea, not Stan Lee's, because Stan Lee only wrote the first story. But in the second story, Roy Thomas created Carol Danvers, and Carol Danvers was the security chief, right? And so, but then the monster of the week would attack the missile base, and Dr. Walter Lawson would disappear, and Captain Marvel would show up and defend the missile base. And so Carol Danvers was saying, "There's something strange about Professor Walter Lawson over here, and I don't quite 100% trust this guy. And oh my gosh, here comes the monster of the week, and here comes Captain Marvel, and he rescues her. He rescues the girl. She falls in love, and then he's like, I must go, etc. And then Walter Lawson comes in, and he's like, hey, sorry guys, what I miss? Huh? Dr. Lawson, where were you when the monster attacked and Captain Marvel was saving everybody? Oh, that dreamy Captain Marvel, you know, because he's a hero, and I take heroes very seriously. Does this sound like Superman?
No.
All right, fine. That's your opinion. But strong female character, secret identity of superhero. She's in love with the superhero, and she doesn't quite trust the secret identity because he's always disappearing when the trouble's around.
Well, that's similar. Yes. Okay. I get it. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, it's hot in here. But yeah. So, but then again, that just shows, you know, it's like somebody said, there's only like 7 stories in the whole world, and you know,
Yeah.
Joseph Campbell has identified the persistence of myth, and how every culture has its own myths, and the basics of, you know, myths and legends and heroic stories and all like that. So when I was, 5 and 6 years old, reading Spider-Man, reading Superman, reading Batman, I saw the same things, you know, especially Spider-Man, Superman, because here was the wimpy alter ego, the powerful superhero, you know, and it was also at a time in which, you know, in the 70s, in which anti-authoritarianism was a big thing, and so Spider-Man was hunted by the police. I happened to catch Batman when he was hunted by the police, and I happened to see one of my first Captain America story was one where he was hunted by the police. So I thought that superheroes were hunted by the police. I thought that was the thing.
Yeah. Well, even the original X-Men, that was the whole thing on them, and well, even the later ones too. You know, it's like
the later ones before they were originally they were working with the government, but yes, then they became outlaws.
Yeah.
And I got an issue of the Freedom Fighters, were back in the 25-cent comic book days, and they were hunted by police. So when I was seeing all these stories, I believed that the superhero trope, that to be a superhero, you had to be hunted by the police. It's amazing what you see when that's all you see. You see the patterns you see, and that's how people get things wrong. You know, I don't know that Superman was ever hunted by the police, but I had not read that many Superman stories, so there it is.
I think eventually there were ones, not initially. Initially, yeah, it was pretty straightforward. You know, problem, Superman comes to solve it. I mean, you see that in the Fleischer cartoons. You know, the pretty basic story. All the the Siegel and Schuster stories kind of follow that same basic pattern. You know, at least initially during the
but I had never. But Perry White always wanted to find out who is this Superman.
Yeah.
So there was always a mystery. Who is this guy? Now, I had not seen a single Marvel comic Captain Marvel story until the Death of Captain Marvel graphic novel. So I wasn't aware of whatever Captain Marvel was, although he did have a period where he was hunted by the police late in his green and white costume days, before Roy Thomas and Gil Kane gave him the negabands and turned him into and introduced him to Rick Jones and turned that into a science fiction version of the Shazam concept. where Rick Jones and Marvell would switch places in the negative zone, and there was lots of existential crisis going on. Rick Jones saying, "Here I am, floating in the middle of nowhere, Marvell, let me out." Well, Marvell somehow has the serenity, even before he became a cosmic space hippie, to go hanging out in the negative zone, while Rick Jones is out there dating girls and trying to make it as a musician and so forth. You know, but then they were two separate personalities that shared a body and a memory, just like the original Captain Marvel, and that was the point. The original Captain Marvel was two separate people, Billy Batson and Captain Marvel, with separate personalities and shared memories, without the existential crisis and mental dilemmas going on in there. Because like they would shop for Christmas presents for each other. Billy Batson got fiddlesticks for Captain Marvel, and he's like, "Oh wow, I've always wanted a fiddlestick set. I guess it's must be the kid in me." Captain Marvel got a nice loud tie for Billy Batson, but then one time Captain Marvel got a girlfriend, and he was seeing this girlfriend every night, right? And Billy Batson is like, "Darn it, Captain Marvel, you're driving me nuts. I need to get sleep because I got to go to work in the morning. Shazam!" "Oh, Billy, you don't know what it's like to be in love. She's so beautiful. She's so wonderful. You just got to let me have this in my life." Shazam! "No, she's a gold digger, and she just wants you for your fame and for your fame. You're just too starry-eyed to know it, to figure this out. Shazam! Oh, give it a break, Billy Batson. You're just yes, they would do that. All right, but then when and so the original Captain Marvel had the personality and relative maturity of a grown man, as well as the wisdom of Solomon. Although he was shy around women, he was always written as being devastatingly handsome, and women would come up to him and they'd kiss him on the cheek and he'd blush and all like that. Although he did actually go out with Butea Savannah once or twice. That would be the beautiful daughter of Dr. Savannah, as opposed to Georgia Savannah. And I can't believe how old I was before I realized the pun in that. Georgia Savannah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, which Roy Thomas hung a lampshade on when he was drawn Captain Marvel shortly before, after the Kree Skrull War, and before Jim Starlin got his hands on him. He drew a couple of stories drawn by that he had Wayne Boring drew. Wayne Boring was the famous 1950s artist of Superman. And it didn't quite work. His style didn't quite match, and his figures seemed unflexible. The torso is too long and didn't bend. But in those stories, Roy Thomas, oh, what a cute schmuppy pup. Yeah. In those stories, Roy Thomas created a Dr. Savannah, spelled like the city. And a villain named Mr. Mind, spelled Mynde. And of course, this was right on the eve of DC licensing the original Captain Marvel to, oh my gosh, let me plug in. Hang on a second. In. Okay, we're charging. Where was I? So yeah, where were we? We were talking about Savannah and Mind, and
right before DC brought
right before
Shazam,
DC licensed and revived the original Captain Marvel. Yeah. So I mean, the connections were abounding there, and it's always fun to watch in going through the history of the Captain Marvels when they reference each other. Now, of course, you've been saying split Captain Marvel a few times, so as we all know, and well, as you and I know, but many people don't, Marvel Comics was not the second publisher to publish a hero named Captain Marvel. It was this schlockmeister named Myron Fass who if you've ever been to a newsstand in like 1981 or something and found a magazine that says aliens live among us and stuff like that, that was probably a one-shot magazine by him, where
Yeah.
he gets a bunch of royalty free, or he pays a couple of bucks to Reuters or whatever and gets a bunch of pictures, and writes a bunch of the bad science, quoting Eric von Daniken and stuff like that. But he had been in the comic book industry during the golden age, and he was a friend or something with Carl Burgos. Carl Burgos is a guy who created the original Human Torch, who was an android in a red suit with blonde hair. And in well, let's see, as some people know, the original Captain Marvel stopped being published in 1953 when Fawcett lost the suit with DC, and I want to get into a detail on that many people miss later. Well, but they settled. I'm just going to get to the point where they settled the suit, and part of the agreement was to stop publishing Captain Marvel. And Fawcett Publications went on its merry way as a wildly successful and very diversified magazine publisher. They did not go out of business like many people think.
Right.
But let's see. After that, because superheroes had been falling in success, and then the next thing you know, Martian Manhunter, the New Flash, and the Silver Age of comics and superheroes begins. And then there's the Justice League, and according to legend, the publisher of DC was talking with the publisher of Marvel about the success of Justice League, and that was Martin Goodman. And Martin Goodman said to Stan Lee, "Give me a superhero team." Now, Bob Bierbaum, who's got a Facebook presence and every day just lays out this lots and lots of info about the history of comics, because he was like one of the original comic collectors of all
Right.
time. And he knew all the people, he talked to all the people, he's collected all the conversations and interviews and everything. So the story about the golf conversation probably never happened, but it did happen that first came the Flash, then the Justice League, then the Fantastic Four. That
Mm-hmm.
is the sequence of events.
Mm-hmm.
And with the Fantastic Four, whatever else you can say about Stan Lee, good or bad, he was a master salesman, a master showman, and that led to the pop art era of comics. And the pop art era of comics cannot be denied as an inspiration for the Batman TV show.
Right.
And It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman, the Broadway musical. And the fact of, in 1966, a whole lot of other comic book companies coming out with superhero comic books. Harvey was coming out with superheroes. Archie was coming out with superheroes. And Myron Fast, never being a guy to let a trend go, Carl Burgos was working for him.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 1966, out came a new comic book called Captain Marvel. I'm just trying to see if the box that I have that in is anywhere nearby. Oh well, no, I don't. But you can
Yeah.
research and throw this up when you edit. You can throw up a copy of the cover whenever you want to.
Yeah.
And it said inside the front page, based on a character created by Carl Burgos, and he was an android in a red suit with blonde hair. Only he was from another planet. He was from another planet that was destroyed by a nuclear war, essentially, and he was sent to Earth to make sure that this doesn't happen to other worlds,
Mm-hmm.
which is that's a Superman / Moses trope, a
Mm-hmm.
Superman Moses Messiah trope.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and his power was by saying the word split. He could split his arms, split all his body parts,
Right.
his head, his arms, his fingers, his feet, and so forth. And by saying Zam, XAM, he could pull them all back together. Get it? Split Zam. Not Shazam, Split Zam. And his best friend was a boy named Billy Baxton. Not Batson, Baxton. And then one day he fought this this bat-winged supervillain in gray and black called the Bat. And then the very next issue, he was called the Ray and was purple and something. So maybe somebody sent a C&D letter or just made a phone call. And
Right.
let's see. And then on one cover it said, "This issue introducing Plastic Man," and the very next issue he was Elastic Man. And then there were other heroes and villains like Adam Jaw and Dr. Fate and that such obvious ripoffs of names and characters that's just absurd. And every issue was a 25-cent special action issue with more pages than usual. And Michael Uslan, the guy who produced all the Batman movies and big Captain Marvel fan, by the way, he didn't want to buy it because he told me it was too expensive. This was the day of 12-cent comics, right? Who's going to pay 25? Even if it is a special action issue with more pages. And truth to tell, some of the stories were just bizarre. Some of them were just bad. And the art was eh. It was a different artist almost every issue, but it was always eh with regards to art. At its best, the art and the stories were just, whoa, just way out there. Just like, what the? It's like you just sit there and go, what? It's like the way you look at certain AI stories today. Like someone says, "Tell a funny joke" to AI, and you get the story, you get the joke, and just go, "Wait, what?" I don't know. Maybe it was time traveling AI or proto AI or something, but whatever. And so, after 4 issues of Captain Marvel and 2 issues of, um, what was it? The infamous 5 against Captain Marvel. You look up that title. I don't have my book handy. It stopped. All right. But what's interesting is there was a long delay between the last issue of Captain Marvel and the first issue and second issue of the terrible 5, Captain Marvel against the Terrible 5. That's what the title was. Suspiciously long interval, but only a couple of months between the last issue of that Captain Marvel and the first appearance of Marvel Comics Captain Marvel Superheroes number 12. Now, in the official history of Marvel Comics from 1989 or something, Stan Lee says, "Well, I saw this and I thought we're Marvel Comics, we should have a Captain Marvel." And so I created an alien from outer space. Roy Thomas, in his introduction to the Marvel Masterworks editions of Captain Marvel, and in several other sources, says Martin Goodman saw the Myron Fast Captain Marvel and says, "Stan, give me a Captain Marvel." However, Roy Thomas more recently said to me in personal conversation, and also in an interview I did for him that's on my Captain Marvel Culture YouTube channel, where I had Jackson Bostwick, who played Captain Marvel, Marvel Comics who played the original Captain Marvel on television before he got fired and was replaced by John Davey, and Roy Thomas on opposite sides of me. And I was able to get them to talk about their careers and how they became involved in Captain Marvel, and in Roy Thomas how he became involved in DC's Captain Marvel, and how both of them then ceased to be involved with their particular production companies' Captain Marvels as parallel stories. It was a masterpiece of interviewing. So you can go check that out on youtube.com/Captain Marvel Culture. But anyway, so Roy Thomas told me that he remembers a lecture that Stan Lee gave to a college or something, where he said that there was an animation company, a TV animation company, that got in touch with Marvel Comics to create an animated cartoon about a superhero created by Marvel Comics that would be named Captain Marvel, that had something to do with outer space because it was 1967 and the space race was on. Maybe Myron Fast got wind of this and decided to throw out a few more issues of his Captain Marvel. because after Marvel Comics came out with their Captain Marvel, Myron Fass sued Marvel Comics saying it was trademark infringement. The
Mhm.
character was completely different. And in fact, in the case between DC and between the company now known as DC and Fawcett, the judge, both in the original trial and in the appeal, said the similarities and differences of the character don't matter when you're talking about copyright infringement. What and the case that case was decided on the basis of what, if anything, was actually copied by Fawcett from anything that DC had done with Superman, meaning stories, meaning covers, meaning pictures. And some people from DC said yes, it was. Some people from Marvel said yes, they told me to do it, and some no Marvel Fawcett. Some people from Fawcett said yes, they told me to do it. Some people from Fawcett said no, I didn't tell them to do it. But the judge said, "Get real, come on."
Mhm.
And in fact, Judge Learned Hand in the appeal says it's obvious just by looking at it there was copying. But for so DC wins, but in order to determine damages, you got to actually show instances of copying in order to determine damages. And that's what would have taken all the time. Who the hell's going to read through all these issues of Superman and Action Comics and World's Finest and Justice League, Justice Society, because he was in there,
Mhm.
and every issue of Captain Marvel Adventures and Wiz and Marvel Family, not to mention the Captain Marvel Jr. and Mary Marvel stories, etc., and America's Finest Comics. Who's going to read through all of these page by page, panel by panel, and then take them up in front of a judge to argue? That's why. And superheroes were falling in sales. And so, being a successful magazine publisher, Fawcett made the business wise decision to Fawcett made the business wise decision to pull the plug on their whole comics division, sold off a bunch of their properties to Charlton, including Hoppy the Marvel Bunny, who was renamed and recolored to become Happy the Magic Bunny, with the magic word being Alazam instead of Shazam, and just left the rest of the Marvel family fallow because they weren't, and then I'll get back to what happened to them. But the point being that in that trial, it's not the similarities and differences of characters that determine whether or not a copyright was violated. So Myron Fass couldn't say that your Captain Marvel is similar to my Captain Marvel. He had to say your trademark matches my trademark. The title of a comic book, the title of a publication is a trademark.
Great.
And so they settled, and what's the name's Marvel Comics gave Myron Fass a few $1,000s, and that was less than what Myron Fass was even asking for in the first place. And it in the settlement, they secured the trademark, Captain Marvel. And
Interesting.
so that brings us to the point of the story where it's 1971 or two, and Carmine Infantino, when I asked him, whose decision was it to bring Captain Marvel back, said that was me. I love
Mhm.
Captain Marvel. So what? You just called him up and said, and I said, yeah, I called up Fawcett. I said, what would it take for us to get Captain Marvel? And they said, make us a deal. Frankly, I think they were happy to get rid of him. I mean, they couldn't do anything with him. They weren't going to pay for the trademark. What are we going to do? Pay $200 for per every 5 years for a trademark we can't even use?
Right.
So that's why it was available for Myron Fass to use. But so they licensed the character to DC Comics, and it wasn't until 1991 that DC finally bought the rights outright from
Okay.
Fawcett. That's why whenever you see a reprint of an old Fawcett story in a DC comic, there's the Fawcett Publications copyright on the splash page. But they already knew we can't put Captain Marvel on the cover because it's a trademark. So what are we going to do? Think, 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 think. Let's see. It's not just the one hero, it's his whole family. And they all get the power by saying the name of or from the wizard Shazam, because of course Captain Marvel Jr. would say Captain Marvel, which means he can't say blah 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 blah. So let's call the comic book Shazam. Let's make the trademark Shazam, all capital letters with an exclamation point. That, when drawn out, is a lightning bolt with a dot at the bottom. And if you'll notice, whenever you see those little coupons for comic books to subscribe from in those DC comics from the 1970s, it's Shazam in all caps with an exclamation point because it's a trademark. And if you'll notice, the action figures, the T-shirts, the title of the TV show
Mm-hmm.
was Shazam, all capital letters with an exclamation point. And you flip the box over, and it says, "When Billy Batson says the magic word, he turns into the world's mightiest mortal." Now, if you look close enough and you look at enough boxes, you'll actually see on the back it says transforms into Captain Marvel, but that's in small type on the back of the box. And if you open up the comic book, you'll see it still says his name is Captain Marvel.
Oh yeah.
And if you turn on the TV show, you'll hear the announcer say, "With one magic word, he turns in, Billy Batson transforms into Shazam. Billy Batson turns into Captain Marvel."
Mm-hmm.
Because the copyrighted character is named Captain Marvel. And the name of a character is not a copyrightable thing. A copyright is an expression of an idea.
Hmm.
It is not a name. So a name can be a trademark, but you can't copyright a name. And that's why everybody in the Kids Brothers Uncle's Dog can come up with Captain Marvel. So long as that Captain Marvel is nothing like any Captain Marvel that anyone actually has a copyright of. Okay, so there's someone out there who created a one-shot issue with a 2-page story of Mary Miracle, who is a version of Fawcett's Mary Marvel. And as the 75-year expiration date on copyrights expires year by year by year, another bunch of Fawcett comics becomes public domain. And so then, have you heard of Guandanaland?
Yeah.
The
They're a
Guandanaland
publisher.
Library
Yeah.
are a
Yeah.
publisher that collects public domain comic books.
Yeah.
Comic book stories. And so every year they can publish some more comic book stories. And now you can get from them either custom order or request or something that he already does. Every Captain Marvel story, every story from Fawcett up to exactly 75 years ago. And whatever, and if they can't find the plates, they'll find extant copies of the comic and put them together. And one of the best ones is the collection of Mr. Tawny stories, because Mr. Tawny, the talking tiger, in addition to being an everyman and an iconic figure to metaphorically discuss race issues, those were some of the best stories that Otto Binder ever wrote. And the fact that Otto Binder, the guy who wrote the original I, Robot, happened to have written more stories about any Marvel family characters than anyone else during the Fawcett era, just shows how connected to things the original Captain Marvel is, as does the fact that I keep on going off on tangents and I forgot what I was originally trying to get to.
Well, I can ask you a few questions if you don't mind.
Oh, sure,
All right.
sure,
So
sure.
let's start at the beginning, or what is considered the beginning. Okay. So when they created Captain Marvel for Wiz Comics, there was an ash can that said Captain Thunder. Why was there confusion or anything with the name way
Why
back
did they change the
when?
name?
Yeah. Why?
Why did they change the name? All right.
Yeah.
Well, Captain Thunder's a logical name. He
Yeah.
says Shazam, thunder, and lightning. He's got a lightning bolt on his chest. I don't know whether Bill Parker or C.C. Beck was the one who had the idea of making him a military-inspired superhero, but C.C. Beck certainly drew him as one. The jacket flap, the cape, which is supposed to be short, which is only supposed to hang off, which is supposed to be hanging off of the left shoulder by default. Those flowery things on the side, that's the brocade that you see on a Napoleonic era cavalryman's jacket, which was worn on the left shoulder as a style.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fashion, and the cape also happens to evoke the exact cut of a Renaissance era short cloak of a gentleman that he would wear with the string under his armpit. So it's an interesting combination of two historical fashion elements. But anyway, now an interest that this is both the answer to your question is both a story in and of itself and a story of my research.
Mhm.
So it being the age of the internet, I decided, there ought to be enough information on the internet for me to write a book. Um, you
Not
want to write a book
necessarily.
about, yeah, you want to write a book about parakeets. You can go to the library and find out enough to write a pretty good book about parakeets, right? For how to raise a parakeet. You can probably write a pretty good book about parakeets by doing it by going to the library. That's how a lot of those books about parakeets get written.
Yeah.
So, so I started looking and looking and looking and looking. How old is this theory that in the first issue of Jungle Comics from I forget which company, there was a backup story about a Captain Terry Thunder. And Jungle Comics was cover dated January 1940. Whiz Comics, the first issue of Comics that hit the stands, which is Whiz Comics #2, and there's another story about that everybody disagrees on, is February 1940, which
Right.
means it really probably hit the stands in December 1939. So then if we can assume that Jungle Comics #1 had the same kind of delay, but they would always put the cover date a couple of months in the future from its newsstand date so that newsstand owners wouldn't be so quick to say, oh, that's last month's issue and throw them away.
Mhm.
So that's why it hits December. It says February. So someone who, when did I put this down? I don't know. It still says February. So I'll leave it up for the rest of the month.
Mhm.
That's what that's all about. So we can assume that if the company that did Jungle Comics used the same time gap, then that would have come out in November 1940. And just the math doesn't seem to work out for me. Publishing things took a longer time back then than it does now.
Right.
And now you can just go down to a copy shop, right? Digital print on demand, right? And it's like
Mhm.
you could press a button and stop the presses and get it started again in as quickly as it would take for you to edit the publisher program. And I'm probably dating myself by saying it's a publisher program. I don't know what it would be now. I still use Publisher 98. Anyway, so so they've got the ash cans out, right, to secure copyright and trademark and whatnot. And they say the first one was going to be called Flash Comics, but then one of the two companies now that merged and became DC, because you remember there was Detective Comics and there was All American Comics. All
Right.
American Comics came out with the first. They were like an associated company.
Right.
Came out with the first issue of Flash Comics early enough that the folks at Fawcett were able to see it and changed the title to Thrill Comics. Then somebody else came out with the Thrilling Comics early enough for someone at Fawcett to see it and think. Let's see. And I'm not exactly sure. I gotta have to look up when in the storyline did Captain Wilford H. Fawcett, retired U.S. Army, aka Captain Billy Fawcett, the founder of Fawcett Comics, died, because he died before Wiz Comics first came out. And what's his name? Major Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson was out from the company that he started that became DC Comics before the first issue of Superman came out. And there are debates over how much influence Major Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson had on the development of Superman, and how much influence whether or not it was his decision to put Superman in the first issue of Action Comics. But the point being that the founders of the two major publishing companies that produced Superman and the original Captain Marvel, who were the two most popular superheroes of the Golden Age, who had such similar powers and later went to war with each other in court, were both gone from their company, one by death, the other by being screwed over by his creditors, before their biggest major editorial comic book contribution hit the stands.
Right.
Coincidence. All right.
Interesting.
So I actually like to start the story with two retired U.S. Army officers, the major and the captain, but we don't have time for that. So it's not ringing true to me. And I go over to Jim Steranko, right? See him at conventions a lot, and I say, hey Jim, who did you talk to when you wrote your history of comics? Because he wrote a very extensive history of Fawcett
Right.
of comics with a whole lot of Fawcett in it. And he said, I talked to the people who were there, and I interviewed them, and back when they were alive, 1970, whatever.
Yeah.
And and no one mentioned Captain Terry Thunder to me. They all just and so the story that he tells is that the editorial staff of Fawcett thought that the name Thunder was too clamorous.
Hmm.
That's the word that he used. So they kicked around some ideas, and Pete Costanza, who inked C.C. Beck's work and who drew three, let's see, Beck drew 3 or 4 stories, and Pete drew the other 3. In that first issue was comics, came up with Captain Marvelous,
Hmm.
which was a little, a little big, a little clumsy. So Captain Marvel.
Hmm.
And that's how Captain Marvel came. And when I asked PC Hammerlake, you know him?
Not. Oh yeah, I've heard of him. But I don't know him. So.
Alter, okay,
Yeah.
Alter
Yeah.
Ego magazine, Roy Thomas's Alter Ego magazine. The backup feature is Fawcett
Okay,
Collectors of
that's what I
America,
know.
which was
Okay.
the
All right. All
newsletter.
right. Yeah. Hmm.
He's the newsletter that he started, and he was friends with all those guys. C.C. Beck gave him a sword that he had made, a Shazam sword that he had made. And he was close personal buddies with Mark Swayze, who drew a lot of stories. Oh, anyway, he sent to me an excerpt from the Superman Captain Marvel lawsuit,
Hmm.
where editor Ralph Daig said changing the name was my idea. I just didn't like Captain Thunder, so I came up with Captain Marvel. Now, is he telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth because he's in court? Or is he kind of trying to defend himself for some reason that maybe if they had changed the name due to seeing a superhero in another comic, well, Captain Terry Thunder was an adventurer, not a superhero. But the point being, if he'd seen something in another comic that inspired him, then the lawyers could have said, look, here's something he admits that he did because he saw it in another comic book.
Yeah.
And so maybe he's defending himself. And so I'm looking, and the earliest reference in the internet that I can find that is a website dated 2012. And I'm like, that's it. That settles it for me between Steranko and that 2012 website. And I can't find anything sooner. And that guy couldn't remember where he heard it. I'm betting that was like Victorian historians just making up stuff because it sounds good, even without actually doing the research. And that is why so much what we think we know about the Middle Ages, so much is wrong. But anyway, then as I'm digging into more research, I open up this magazine that was published right about the time that the Shazam TV show came on. It's all about the history, and they say that they changed the name because of Captain Terry Thunder in Jungle Comics #1. And then I find a couple of other sources that are either corroborating or acknowledging that the theory exists.
Mm-hmm.
Thut. I'm quoting Shakespeare by putting a T at the end, so you don't have to edit that out.
Oh,
But that's what I said. And it's like, so now I just got to put that into the great unknown. Okay, I could go and do some more math, and I could try to find out the distance in time between the publication of Flash Comics #1 and the Thrill Comics Ashcan, the publication of Thrilling Comics #1, and the publication of Whiz Comics #1, and see if those gaps match the gap between the publication of Jungle Comics #1 and Whiz Comics #2.
Yeah.
And if those gaps correspond, then maybe they did have time to stop the presses, go back, re-letter the Captain Marvel story, and then send it back to the printer. Re-letter and recolor, because the letters in the title were colored, so they'd have to send it to the colorist.
Yeah.
Allegedly it wasn't an art person who did it, but rather some women working for salary, and so just picking whatever color they wanted. Well, yay to them for having good color sense, for giving them that red suit with the golden accents and the white cape. Yeah, so there's that.
Okay, so I'm going to interrupt here because the thing that's really odd, based on everything you said about all this, is if they're trying not to have copyright infringement by seeing things on the stands, there was an actual Marvel Comics published by Timely on the stands in 39. It became Marvel Mystery. Why did they use Captain Marvel at that point, even though they didn't ever have any troubles with it until the 60s?
Was it 39 or was it 40?
It was 39 when first Marvel Comics came out. So
All
did
right.
they just ignore that one and say, we're tired of changing the title? Captain Marvel it is. And since it was Timely Comics, they weren't going to say anything at the time, even though they did call it Marvel Comics or Marvel Mystery Comics from issue 2 forward,
Well,
so
the title of Wiz Comics wasn't Captain Marvel. The title of Wiz Comics was Marvel Comics. Well, the title of Wiz Comics was Wiz Comics.
right. But I'm just
And
talking
it
about
said
the
in small
character,
letters.
but then
It
they had
said in,
Captain Marvel Adventures like a year later or two,
yeah,
so
they had Captain Marvel Adventures, not
okay.
Marvel Comics. And it
But
wasn't
maybe they
Captain
just weren't
Marvel, it was
as
Captain
sue
Marvel
happy or litigious,
Adventures.
which brings it back to why did they even care? Why didn't they just go ahead with Captain Thunder or Flash
Well,
Comics or whatever? I don't
maybe
know.
Ralph,
It seems kind of
maybe,
odd.
maybe
All right.
Ralph Day wasn't lying.
Yeah.
Maybe he really didn't like the title. Maybe they really did think Captain Thunder
Possible.
was
Yeah.
too famous. And
Yeah.
also, what's so great about Thunder? It's a big loud noise that bothers people.
Yeah. Well, this is also
Okay.
the thing on your shirt is lightning anyway. It's not thunder.
Right. Well,
Why didn't they do
however,
Captain Lightning?
however,
Anyway,
Marvel was a word in common usage in the period. You can even look at what year was Wizard of Oz? 38 or 39? 38, right?
well, filmed in 38, but yeah, it came out in 39. So yeah,
All
and
right.
yeah,
And
the original book is the Marvelous Wizard of Oz. You're correct. So yeah,
that's right.
yeah.
And
So
that was in like the 1910s or something that the
and
books
and
were
uh,
written.
the alter ego of Oz in the dream portion is Professor Marvel. So yes,
Professor Marvel. So the term Marvel was used pretty regular and was
yeah,
in common usage.
yeah,
So so saying Captain Marvel then would be like saying Captain Awesome today.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
because
that
how
was
often
always
is awesome
the
used?
interesting part about that. So now I have one other question I want to get to before we run out of time. But
Yeah, and I also want
so
to catch up. I
we
also want
got
to,
up to
yeah.
53. Fawcett stopped between 53 and when Myron Foss did it. No one else attempted to do anything according to your research. Not even DC trying to publish it when they stopped in 53. They didn't have any interest at all
Why
to your
would they?
well, I don't know. I'm just asking.
They
Is
just spent a
yeah,
bunch of money. They just
yeah.
spent a bunch of money to stop it.
Well,
Why
because
would they?
they took over titles from Quality Comics and other labels before, so I thought they could have, but maybe it was because
Wait,
superheroes weren't selling.
Quality Comics, that was the Freedom Fighters, right?
They had GI Combat as one, and I can't remember all of them. I had the Quality Companion on
Or was no, I'm no, because Charlton Blue Beetle and all them, and
yeah,
and Peacemaker and all that.
yeah.
Quality Comics was the Freedom Fighters, Earth X. All right, but when did DC pick up Earth X?
I
When
thought it
did
was
they
in
pick up
I thought
that?
it was in the 50s sometime. I have to look. I have the Quality Comics Companion, but I haven't read it in a while. So
Okay, well,
anyway,
in the 50s,
but they got Blackhawk from it, and they got GI Combat from it, and a couple others.
all right. Yeah, but did they shut down Black Hawk and GI Comic and Phantom Lady and the Freedom Fighters uh, through a lawsuit that they had gone over that had lasted over
No,
10 years?
no, they just took the
Okay,
numbering
so
over. But I don't
there's,
know. It's yeah, okay,
I can't see a reasonable case for
yeah,
for hi, thanks for the $400,000 that you paid us to make us stop to make us stop trying to stop you from publishing your most successful comic book.
yeah.
Now, can we have the character?
Well,
I just don't see
yeah.
why anybody would come up with that. And that actually brings me back to one thing that I was
Of course,
trying
they
to get
kind of
back to
did do
was
that just 20 years later. But hey,
right. If
anyway,
there, well, here's the thing: how many of the people in upper management of DC Comics were still around who had been there in 1953? I'm pretty sure this is very close to the number.
Hmm.
Okay. And if you don't believe Carmine Infantino, then maybe you'll believe Mark Evanier. But Mark Evanier worked with, he's the guy who writes Gru the Wanderer and a whole bunch of other
Oh
things,
yeah,
and he
oh
wrote
yeah.
the Dungeons and Dragons TV cartoon, which
Hmm.
he insists they never found their way home. That's a Mandela effect thing. Um, he worked with Jack Kirby,
Right.
and Jack Kirby had just gone to DC Comics in the early 70s. He was doing OMAC and Commandy and so forth.
Right.
In his trend of science fiction near future stories of a loner against the world, right?
Mhm.
It was his idea to license or resurrect a bunch of characters from other companies, and I'll write them or I'll edit them, said Jack, and we can have our artists draw them, and one of them will be the original Captain Marvel. And you may recall Simon and Kirby wrote and drew the first issue of Captain Marvel Adventures over a period of 2 weeks in a
Mhm.
hotel room, where they spent the nights after going after spending the day in Marvel's offices doing Captain America. And at the end of that, they were saying they were offered the opportunity to sign their work. And according to Joe Simon in his book, The Comic Book Makers,
Mhm.
this thing's going to crash. This thing's going to bomb. Let's not sign it. And boy, were they wrong. And speculators like to think if
Yeah.
Simon and Kirby had done Captain Marvel,
Captain
instead of um, Otto Binder, how different would it have been?
Marvel.
But so it was Jack. So if you don't believe Carmine Infantino was Jack Kirby's idea, Carmine Infantino may still have been the guy to make the phone call to Fawcett, but it was Jack Kirby's idea to bring him back. Jack Kirby was not involved in the lawsuit on any side of the issue at the time, so he didn't have an axe to grind. He just liked the character and thought that there was an audience for it.
Mhm.
But it is interesting to note that Otto Bender, who was one of the folks who got laid off by Fawcett when they shut down their comics, wound up working for DC and writing a lot of Superman stories and creating characters like Crypto, the Super Dog, and the Legion of Superheroes,
Mhm.
and developing the Superboy character
Right.
and Linda Danvers, Supergirl. And why does Linda Danvers, whose Kryptonian name is Kara, making her Kara Danvers, have such a similar name as Marvel Comics Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers? And Roy Thomas says, I don't know where I got the Danvers name. I admit it's not common, but I wasn't thinking about DC Supergirl. What are you going to do?
Wow.
I looked it up. Danvers is the name of a town somewhere.
Yeah.
That's when you just search it. So and so now people are saying that Marvel was deliberately trying to create a Supergirl when they created Carol Danvers, but then Carol Danvers was not Ms. Marvel until 1977, 10 full years after she was created. So you really can't that'd be a long-term plan for someone in 1967 to have.
Right.
And Roy Thomas stopped writing Captain Marvel, after I don't know, half dozen some odd issues. You can look that up.
Yeah.
And then Carol Danvers persisted as a character, kept on coming back, involved in the Kree Skrull War here and there. And it wasn't until 1977 that Marvel Comics created his first feminist superhero, Ms. Marvel, wearing a bathing suit with a belly button cut out, belly
Yeah.
button and lower back cut out, and schizophrenia. So, in my personal opinion, Marvel Comics' second Captain Marvel, Monica Rambeau, who was created by Roger Stern, at least partly because his wife said, hey, Captain Marvel's not a gender specific name, and we don't have too many female characters, and we don't have any black female characters. I don't know if that was his wife's idea or his idea, but it was 1982, and if you don't have a black something in everything, then you've missed the boat. And so they created Monica Rambeau, and I find Monica Rambeau a better feminist role model than the 1977 version of Ms. Marvel, which, by the way, is Ms. MS with a period, not Miss. And for those who don't know, Miss means I'm not married. Mrs. means I am married. Mr. means it's none of your business whether I'm married. Now, why don't women have an equivalent to Mr.? So somebody invented MS with a period pronounced Ms. and means it's none of your business that whether or not I'm married. And the first issue of Ms. Magazine in 1972 had, guess what superhero on the cover?
Wonder Woman.
There you go. So Marvel Comics needed a Wonder Woman, and it took them
Yes.
5 years to come up with Ms. Marvel. And I didn't. But frankly, because Monica Rambeau was a female harbor cop, was a New Orleans Harbor Patrol cop, lieutenant, facing a glass ceiling. It was gender, not racism, because her boss was black, and became a superhero, and became a damn good superhero,
Mhm.
who did the research when she became a member of the Avengers, figured out the powers and abilities and trends of all the enemies, and was able to say, this one hates pickles, so you get the lights, you get the curtains, and you, Captain Pickle, throw pickles at them, or whatever it would take to beat them. And Roger Stern was absolutely right to be pissed off when Marvel Comics decided we want to bring Captain America back as the leader of the Avengers. And so, wait a minute, you're taking our most powerful our most powerful black superhero, a black female superhero in our well, I don't know if Avengers was selling better than X-Men at the time. We can look that up. But in our first or second best-selling team book, she's our first or best-selling black female superhero, and you're gonna take her away from being leader of the Avengers. And so he quit the book because of that. And there is a YouTube video out there about the racist history of Captain Marvel. And are they reading too much into it? Was there a racist element to what they did with her? Was it accident? Was it they didn't quite realize what they were doing? Because there is a racist history because racism hits Captain Marvel in several places.
Right.
Pre-politics, blues versus the whites, blatant, right out there, just it comes right out there. In the original Captain Marvels, somebody created a character named Steamboat, who was an independent businessman with a hot dog and hamburger cart, who that got destroyed in Captain Marvel Adventure, and he got a job with Wiz Comics being Billy Batson's valet, and also shared an apartment with him. But he was a demeaning stereotype of the worst kind, speaking in dialect, being comic relief, and much of the comedy being on him being half step less intelligent than the average human, and lips that were more than half the size of his face, till finally a bunch of social justice warrior school kids, and this is the honest definition of the term before it was ever used, not the derisive term used by people whose politics I don't agree with, came up to the Fawcett offices in New York City, and they were like, yeah, we're trying to appeal to a black audience and get black people to buy our Captain Marvel comics. And they basically just held up a picture of Steamboat and said, really, dude?
Yeah.
And the ironic thing is, Fawcett Comics also published the first issue of Negro Romance, in which realistically by comic book standards, drawn black people were the characters. And I think it was Baldo the Boy Magician, I may be pronouncing the name wrong, his best friend, John Smith, was a realistically for comic books drawn black person with reasonable intelligence, with normal person I don't want to say average, because as what's his name, the guy from American Splendor said, average is dumb, man, but normal human intelligence. So it was a
Harvey
deliberate,
Picar.
right, Harvey Picar. But then but 1947, the same year that both football and baseball broke the color line, broke the color barrier, Otto Binder wrote Mr. 20 Gets a New Home, only he finds out that his home is in an exclusive neighborhood, a restricted neighborhood. And we got a petition that says we don't want this undesirable person here. And Captain Marvel said, there's nothing I hate more than prejudice and discrimination, so you're going to stay, Mr. Tony. And the thing is, when you've got a tiger, a beloved tiger at that, people can't say, well, I can discount that story because it's a black guy, and black guys don't deserve the same rights as white people do. It's a beloved tiger. Okay, so daddy, it's wrong to have people who are different from us excluded from our neighborhood, but he's Mr. Tawny. Okay, and yes, they didn't introduce racism as a topic in any Monica Rambeau story until a one-shot issue, probably done to secure trademark, before the introduction of Genisville in 1992, in which Monica Rambeau had to deal with racism on college campuses. But the fact that they had a black female superhero who neither had the name woman, girl, lass, it's Miss, Mrs., or whatever as part of her name, and didn't have the word black as a part of their name, and wasn't involved in any stories involving racism, is like what we're going for. Okay, and they shut it down. You know, and every successive Marvel Captain Marvel has had a direct connection to that original Captain Marvel, either by being his cloned son or cloned daughter, or from the Kree race in an alternate universe, or being a genetically altered Skrull. Monica Rambeau was the only Captain Marvel who was not connected to the original to Marvel Comics Captain Marvel in any way, except that the Mardi Gras costume that she turned into her superhero costume happened to have a black multi-pointed star on it that evoked
Star-Lord.
the Marvel,
Yeah.
the Marvel star.
Yeah,
okay. But it is also funny, and they hung a lampshade on it, that both Monica Rambeau and Carol Danvers Captain Marvel have had multiple names, and they even it's like, what are you doing taking my name? Well, how many names have you had? Captain Marvel, Photon, Pulsar, Spectrum, Monica Rambeau. All right, yeah, sure. I've had a few Ms. Marvel, Warbirds, Binary, and Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers. Gotcha.
I hope the book explains all this in detail that you're working on.
And then what was neat in that story was to defeat the villain of that story.
Yeah.
See, Monica Rambeau is actually not human anymore. She is energy. That's what the radiation did to her. So as energy, she can actually the electromagnetic spectrum, waves and particles, depending upon why you care whether or not it's a wave or a particle, of the electromagnetic spectrum, on the electromagnetic spectrum, are in our bodies. Okay, visible light bounces off, but like gamma rays, alpha rays, they're in there. All right, ultraviolet, infrared. So all she had to do was turn herself into an electromagnetic form rather than a solid human form, and be a part of Carol Danvers' body. And with the two of them together, with the two powers together, they were able to defeat the villain of the month. And then when they got out, Monica Rambeau was like, this is not what she said. I'm just going to say something that comes off the top of my head that gets a point across. And said something like, and by the way, I think that guy's cute too. And Carol Danvers was like, what? Don't you remember? For a moment, I was you. Every part of her includes the brain. So I just thought that was a neat bit to throw in. And I really, really, really do appreciate that Marvel Comics Captain Marvel 2 is now incorporating Monica Rambeau and Kamala Khan, the new Ms. Marvel. And now a lot of the people whose politics I don't agree with are saying things like, oh, that shows that the Brie Larson hate is real. Well, personally, I'm a fan of the big red cheese, but I also like a little Brie. But anyway, and so therefore, and it's so embarrassing that they had to replace her in the cartoon. No, she was busy and couldn't do the voice of her character in the cartoon, so they got someone else. It happens all the fucking time. And so they had to change it to Marvels, and they had to bring in Monica Rambeau. Well, of course, because Monica Rambeau is actually a popular character amongst an underserved member of the comic reading audience, an underserved portion of the comic reading audience. So everybody had been saying, if you're going to bring in Captain Marvel, you got to bring in all the Captain Marvels, and that's why they brought in Monica Rambeau's mom and brought in Monica Rambeau as a character, and so they had to bring her into WandaVision and introduce her and bring her Captain Marvel. So of course they're all going to be in the freaking Marvels movie, and frack you all for making me have to consider this when I see this movie, so that I can't write an honest fracking review. And if you go to the Captain Marvel Culture blog spot, then you'll see my review of I forget if it was the review I wrote of Captain Marvel or the review I wrote of Avengers Endgame, but I think it was the review of Avengers Endgame, and the first line is "frack you all" for the amount of time I have to spend on dealing with your socio-politically motivated conspiracies, okay, against Marvel Comics putting Marvel given female characters good screen time and given Brie Larson the role of their Captain Marvel, and putting her in a movie and making her that powerful. You know, and that scene where you have all the females there on the battlefield saying to Captain Marvel, "We got this," and I'm getting misty-eyed just thinking about it. It's like that movie was the All-Star game. Okay, you know, it's not so much the World Series, because in the World Series you see the two best teams. In the All-Star game, you see all the best players.
Yeah.
All right. So yes, there are fans of female superheroes, and no, there aren't as many as there are fans of male superheroes. But if they only fed male superheroes, they'd lose a big chunk of their business. All right. And all you folks who are saying boycott because they're woke, go broke. Well, first off, I looked, and in the same months in which the Captain Marvel and Ms. Marvel comics declined in sales, over the period of 6 months, over the same 6 months, a Conan comic book and a Punisher comic book, who had pretty much equivalent numbers at the start, had the pretty much the exact same decline at the bottom. So that merely proves that number ones and number sixes in those 6 months tended to decline in sales, which is why companies come out with number one issues every year, so that everybody has to buy a new number one. And because we're talking about Captain Marvel, I have to talk about this, which goes to show that just to figure out who is Captain Marvel, when, and why, you have to talk about everything.
Yes.
A social, political, or pop culture trend in the past 100 years, I will find you a Captain Marvel or more than one. The anti-communist witch hunts of the 1950s, I can find you 3. So somebody's got to write this book. Why not me?
So, since you are writing the book, when is it expected, or when do you expect to complete it? I mean,
I do feel a little bit sometimes like who died some time back, who wanted to turn a mountain into a statue of Crazy Horse. You know, it's like you set off you set off some fireworks when some tourists are in town, and then you spend the rest of the time, raising money to buy the next batch of fireworks or whatever, the explosives. Do you have any idea what I'm talking about? Go look up Statue of Crazy Horse. Okay. It was this guy's answer to Mount Rushmore.
Okay.
All right. And he was on Real People or something, and that was the story about him. And tourists show up, and boom, there goes another chunk of the mountain. But he's got a long way to go to finish. And sometimes I feel like that, because it's like, okay, so let's write another blog post. Let's go make a pamphlet that outlines the history and sell it at comic book conventions to make money. No, not just a pamphlet. Let's actually make it a magazine and do like a collage picture around the words. And oh wow, this is actually really good. Like sort of like Arlen Schumer makes his visual, like Arlen Schumer's book about Silver Age comics. I'm not Arlen Schumer level, so I didn't do exactly his technique. But the point was, there's a whole lot of this story's got to be told with pictures. It's about a comic book.
Yeah.
And, and I can put a picture of Senator Joe McCarthy right over that picture of Senator Braddock in the Alien Activities Commission and show the connection between the anti-communist witch hunts of the 1950s and the Kree Skrull War if I just do this. And so now I've got 2.5 of a 3-part miniseries that outlines the whole history without going in too much depth. And that's what I do at conventions. I sell these pamphlets so that people can read the story. The book is going to be a lot bigger. If I could quit my job and just do this, let's see, I'd have the American Nights 2018 done. What's this now? June? Have it done. If I could quit my job today, and I didn't have to take care of my mom, who's transitioning into Alzheimer's, we're going to say, and I didn't have an ongoing legal battle against my Brooklyn landlords, and several other things going on in my life, then I would have American Nights 2018 done by July. As it is, it's such a big product. I had to do it in 4 separate discs, and I'm sending them out like a subscription. And I got the first 2. I'm almost done with the third. I would have that done by the end of July, and I have the book done by Christmas, or maybe Valentine's Day the next year. But what I'm basically going to do is, I'm going to try to get. I was going to try to get disc 1 done today, but that's not going to happen. Disc 3. I'm going to try to get disc 3 done by the end of what's today, Sunday, by the end of the week. Get disc 4 done by the end of July or August at the latest. No, let's be realistic. By the end of August, gonna hit Captain Marvel in September. Captain Marvel Culture in September. I'm gonna try to do a chapter a month. It's probably going to be 20-something chapters. Hopefully I can make some months be more than 2 chapters. But hopefully I can, and do it like subscription style. Just, okay, this is this chapter. That's that chapter. That's that chapter. So you're not waiting for a whole book. And, put it out like a publication. And my sponsor has agreed that that's a good plan. All right. And kudos to you, Evan Israelian, for putting up that money and for putting up with me. He also did make a little money off of that female wrestling team, by the way. Yeah. So I'm looking at next year for those issues to be coming out.
All right. Well, I mean, as long as you continue working on it. I mean, I turned in my History of Mad book earlier this year. It's supposed to come out this year, but it took me. It's the longest period I've ever worked on a single project. It took me over 4 years, so it's like I get it.
And the trouble is, with every month that goes by, you got to add another chapter.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because it's continuing on forever. It's like there'll be 3 more new Captain Marvels by the time you get the book.
If I wanted to have that book out by the time the movie, the year of Shazam and Captain Marvel movies came out so bad.
Yeah.
But when those years were coming around, I was working 2 jobs.
Yeah.
I was working 40 hours a week, so I was doing the blogs. I was doing the blogspot thing during those years, and my night job. But I was doing the blogspot and I was doing some videos during those years. But yeah, so we just gotta keep on keeping on, and certain Captain Marvels inspire me to that. Not the original Captain Marvel, because he's got the stamina of Atlas, so it's not a challenge to him. All right. Not the split Captain Marvel, because he could send his right arm to go shopping while his left arm wrote a book. Not Marvel, because he had too many because his challenges were all like existential and stuff like that. Well, mine is also too, but not to the degree of being his best self, but rather, what am I supposed to do with my life? That was his existential problem a lot, which is also mine, but not as far as this goes. This is what I have to do with my life. It's just getting to it. Marvel didn't know what to do, but I do. I just have to get to it.
Yep.
So, Monica Rambeau, she was on the ball all the time. So, which Novar was just Novar was is is a millennial. So all his issues are teenage millennial issues. The Skrull, how can you identify with a genetically altered Skrull who went too far, who they went too far and can't believe what and will not believe you when you tell him that he's something else? Oh frack. Oh frack. I just made a metaphorical argument against transgender, and I'm not going to explain it because am 100% on the side the transgenderist thing. So I'm not going to explain how Novar is a metaphor that can be used against transgender. On the other hand, all right. So, and then who else we got? Janice Bell. Janice Bell is the most tragic superhero of all time. Well, first, he was trying to live up to the legacy of his father. Now, my father was an artist of moderate renown. Every once in a while, a painting his goes up on auction, and people seek me out, and they find, are you the son of C.J.P. Lequidre? Because I found a picture of him on your website. Yep, that's my dad. My name is Lequidre. His is Lequidre. My mom changed it for numerological purposes. And no, that's not my mom in your painting. Stuff like that. And I don't know how he got to St. Thomas in 1972 because my mom kicked him out in 1969. Stuff like that. But he wasn't a King Arthur movie, and now I'm a big time medievalist, and so I have a picture of me holding my helmet in armor, just like the picture of him that he included in a picture of a French book called Les Chevaliers de the Knights of the Crusades. Sorry,
That's okay.
Yeah, I'm too dehydrated to pronounce French. The Knights of the Crusade. So that's all. I've already inherited that legacy from my dad, but I didn't go into the future and find out that my son was going to be an evil intergalactic dictator, and I did not decide to go back in time and live my life until I had my son, and then I killed him in his crib so that he wouldn't become an evil dictator. So Janice Bell actually did the kill Hitler as a baby thing. And the supervillain that he defeated in the process was not his son, but the Magus. And you're going to have to look into Adam Warlock in order to know who the Magus is. But Adam Warlock is a Captain Marvel adjacent character for several reasons, not the least of which both Roy Thomas and Gil Kane and Jim Starlin worked on him and similar periods in comic book history. But anyway, and the Magus said, so yeah, my plans for intergalactic conquest failed, and all you had to do was destroy any chance of happiness in your life. Well, I guess this wasn't such a bad day for me after all. So I don't have that on my conscience. So who's left? Carol Danvers. In the House of M, her best friend, Wanda, Scarlet Witch, created the universe in which mutants were taken over. And in that world, one human, Carol Danvers, was Captain Marvel, the world's greatest hero. She was the Superman of that world. And when the House of M ended, she came back along with a cat and a supervillain from that other universe, but with full memory of the House of M, unlike most everybody else. I think her and Wolverine, and that's about it. Because Wolverine, right? Okay, and there is a connection to the X-Men, but no, I'm not going into that now.
Please.
I dropped X-Men on the fourth Jean Grey. Okay. Anyway, so she's like, if I was my best self there, why can't I be my best self? Why can't I be the greatest superhero in the world today? And she's always going. And during that period, that Ms. Marvel period, that post House of M Ms. Marvel period, and even to today, well, during then especially, she was always going a little bit further than she was capable, a little bit further, overachieving, even if she failed. Because, you know, if you shoot, you know, you may shoot for the stars, but you land on the roof. But if you never even jump, where are you going to go?
Mm.
And so when I think of that, and she's chasing past that alien warship or whatever it is, and she's calling Captain America, and Captain America's beating up on AIM people and saying, look, I'm kind of busy right now, but call Fantastic Four. They can help you. And it's like, wait, what? Oh no, I dropped my cell phone. Fuck it. I'm just going after them. Frack it. I'm just going after them. Edit that. All right.
That's okay.
You know, so that, you know, so when I'm here and I'm entertaining, and am I being a pretty good person here right now?
I think so.
Okay. I mean, like, I'm entertaining you,
Mm.
I'm educating you,
Yes.
you know, and that's what I want to do with myself. I want to entertain by education. I want to educate by entertainment. I want people to walk away from me knowing something else about the world. And maybe, just maybe, by knowing something else about the world, they can say, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. If that's true, then why am I not doing what I really want to do here?
Mm.
And that was why I put on the armor and picked up the sword and joined the first USA team to fight in the World Championships of Medieval Armored Combat. Because despite, you know, 30 years in the SCA, you know, I hadn't become king, I hadn't become a knight or anything. But with the female wrestling team, I had broken through a whole bunch of comfort zones to train and compete in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and then make a movie, several movies. It was called CZ Redemption. No, it was called The Redemption. It was called Redemption. The Redemption of Captain Zorikh. Find out what you're worth. Because when you turn in your tokens that you won at skee ball, you find out what they're worth. That's what redemption is. That's what redemption is. It's when you find out what you're worth. And so, and CZ Redemption is the name of the YouTube channel. That's a plug. YouTube.com/CZ Redemption. It's easy to remember. CZ Redemption.
Mm.
All right. The Redemption of Captain Zorikh. And you know, and that was the lemonades. That was the lemonade I made out of the lemons of my time at the female wrestling team. That and the country song, My Ex-Girlfriend and His Wife. But you know, I've done all this, right? You know, so here's an opportunity to be the first at something, break out of a comfort zone, fight in armor with steel in rules where you can punch and kick and grapple, and the only hit that counts is when you hit the ground, and I can be with the USA team at the World Championship of it. All right, I'm hitting the gym, I'm changing my diet, I'm going to work really, really, really hard. And I'm going to exhaust myself. And I knocked myself out. I went from being able to do almost 2 bench presses of 135 pounds to being able to do 3 sets of 10.
Mm.
Okay, before I got out there, you know, I was one of the better fighters with single sword. I was with long sword. I was one of the last guy that on the field, whether we won or lost, several times. All right. You know, and then I started making movies about that too. American Knights. You look up the YouTube channel, New York Knights Combat, youtube.com/New York Knights Combat 1. And you'll see the movies I'm making and highlights from the movies I'm making, promos for the movies I'm making, fundraise for the movies I'm making. And if you're watching this, I want you to say, look, if he can work that hard to do what he believes in and do what he really wants to do, how hard can I work to really do what I want to do?
Mhm. All
And
right.
that's what I want to make people walk away from me saying, and want to be their best person.
Mhm.
So that's what Captain Marvel means to me.
Very cool. All right, let's leave it at that. We've talked for well over an hour.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's okay. Makes for a great show, and I am looking forward to whatever you turn out as far as Captain Marvel, if it's in chapters or a full book or both. Because you know the story always fascinates me. You know, I've been a fan since the Shazam days of the mid '70s, and I took it from there. So, all right. I want to thank you, Captain Zorikh, for being my special guest today.
Thank you. That
And
was it. That was Joe Franklin who gave me that name, but I'll tell that story another time.
all right, sounds good. And we'll have you back to talk about something else, maybe, because you have other topics we were talking about beforehand. And I want to
Absolutely.
thank you for being on the show and being my special guest. And uh, that,
Thank you for having me. Thank you for your tolerance, and thank you for putting up with all these missed appointments.
and we got it
Hope
done.
it's
And this is Mark Arnold with another episode of Fun Ideas Podcast, and we'll see you next time.
You bet some Red Rider.